Before we get into it, and I hand over to Alana and Gemma, who we're delighted to welcome back. Both have worked with us on our Conversations with Thought Leaders project before, back in the days when it was webinars during the pandemic. Today we're going to be talking about what's driving and derailing connection in your organisation. A couple of things by way of a definition around connection. A person or thing is linked or associated with something else, generally speaking. And in the business context, a broad relationship or a symbiotic relationship between people causing emotion and action. Now, why is this discussion so important, you might ask? It's something I'm really passionate about. I believe the pandemic was an amplifier. Technology exponentially led different ways of working, sharing information, communicating, and really our fundamental relationships. However, seismic shifts aren't new. Think back to the transition from human to human, horseback messages, pigeons, which my 10-year-old daughter last night told me I definitely must mention. The advent of cars, railways, sea and air travel, the post, telegraphs, radios, newspapers, TV, and the internet. So we've been here before, but how different is it this time? You know, without connecting, you can't be connected. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Alana and Gemma.
We are deeply passionate about connection in the work we do, and we think it's really important that when we get the opportunity to talk about it, that actually we don't just stand here and talk at you, but we give you the experience of connection. So hopefully this morning it's a little different to other presentations that you've gone to in the past, because we believe that for this to be really impactful, actually we need to have a conversation. So that changes things a little bit for us this morning. In any good conversation, there's always at least two willing parties that lean in and maybe want to be curious and want to know each other a little bit better. There's definitely more than two of us here, so my fingers are crossed. This can be a good conversation. The other thing about conversations is that we also want the opportunity to get to know you all. And we want you to do that in a way in which you feel safe and comfortable. So this is the beauty of conversation, is that you can choose what you feel safe and comfortable with sharing. We are not going to stress or force anyone to do anything this morning, but have a great conversation. I'm also going to assume that you have checked out our LinkedIn profiles. That's kind of like all just the professional stuff. And again, in keeping in alignment with our values around connection, we would love to actually give you a real connected introduction of ourselves. So I am a wife. I have two young boys, 9 and 11. For those of you who have that boys, like, wow. Messy, noisy. There's always a conversation about our appendages, what they do, what they don't do, and they think it's hysterical, and I'm the only female in the house. So, I cringe and then think, can we move this conversation on to something else? I have developed a real love for lifting heavy weights over the last year and a half. I've gotten into the gym and I'm about to hit my PB of 130 kilos on a hip thrust for any of you that are into, which is, pretty cool. I was mentioning earlier to Chelsea that when my husband joins me, I always say, could we do a lower body workout today? Because when we don't have a very strong upper body, and I definitely can lift heavier on the lower with him. Not that it's a competition, but it definitely is a competition. I'm an identical twin, and we have that whole twin thing going on. We've experienced each other's morning sickness. Again, for any of you that have had children or partners that have had children, you know how much that sucks. To have it when actually you're not pregnant is sucks so hard. So we have that. We're super, super, super close. I love spending time with my friends and my family and being out in nature. And actually, I don't like my own company. And I think that's because I am a twin. I think I've actually never just had moments where I'm on my own by myself. And this is something that I've really had to learn to do. So sometimes when I go away, I'll say, Gem, do you want to come away for a weekend and work on our business? Yeah. I'm not great at being on my own. But this is a little bit about me, and as I said, in true alignment with our connection values, this is what we think is important when we start conversations with people. And James, over to you.
Oh, thanks. What can I share that's not in the public domain, that you're not able to Google about me? Well, I'll tell you a few things that you might find through Google. I am a queer woman. I live on the beautiful lands of the Wadawurrung people, which is towards Geelong. I'm not quite close enough to the water as I'd like, but I can't really afford. I've been outpriced, you know. That boom where everyone moved just before COVID, just missed that opportunity. And I'm learning more about connection, being someone who's originally from the UK. I moved here when I was 24 years old, and trying to understand more about First Nations culture. And I think this idea of connection as well, looking to how connection is experienced through different cultures as well, is really important. I was on The Weakest Link when I was 19 years old, TV show. Wouldn't find that because that was before YouTube, before streaming services. So thank goodness you'll never be able to find the footage. It's in my mum's loft. So yeah, I did a stint of going on TV shows when I was younger. I also have a caravan. My wife and I and 2 kids have a caravan, so we love to travel. And at the weekend, we were up in Dalesford and connecting with nature, and we saw some amazing, such a geek moment, but we saw these moths and the kids felt like they were on like a David Attenborough show because they could see these moths and the magpies coming, and they were these sort of labyrinth ghost moths. We had to Google that. And the kids were just like fascinated with the fact that the birds were coming to get the moths, and we had then an ethical conversation around where do you intervene. It all was happening. But that's a little bit more about who I am and stuff that you wouldn't be able to find on Google about me. And yeah, if you want to talk, and Peter and I have spoken a bit about caravanning. I know that that's a shared passion of ours. So yeah, anything around diversity and inclusion, around caravanning, around connecting with nature, raising 2 young children, any of those topics, let's connect. So yeah, that's a bit more about me. And on the work front, I mean, you can find out more about us.
Yeah,
but
totally.
Alana and I have worked on some projects with some global and some local businesses around the employee experience, and importantly, how do you create or cultivate connection within the employee experience? And that's kind of our joint passion between our 2 businesses. David gave an example of connection. We want to anchor this to the connection definition that Alana and I use, which is the experience of feeling a sense of closeness to someone or something. And so when we've done projects before, we've looked at how do employees feel a sense of connection to others in the workplace, and how do they feel a sense of connection to the organisation. Also, how do they experience a sense of connection to their career as well. So there's some of the things that we like to explore in the work that we do, and that just anchors our conversation today. We've had some funny experiences talking about connection. What did we hear when people we said we're talking about connection?
Yeah, and someone asked if it was like our Wi-Fi connection. We were like, definitely not your Wi-Fi. I mean, that could be really bad, but it's not the Wi-Fi connection we're talking about. Or the number of LinkedIn connections that you might have, and we were like, no, that's not.
Yeah.
That's not the
So
connection we're
that's what
talking
it's
about.
not. That's what it is
Yes.
for us and the work that we do and the conversation we're having today anyway. See? But we found that through the research. We always have an example of where there is something that diffuses or that amplifies the connection. So whether that's a dog, whether that is an event, a topic that's really meaningful, there is always something that provides the sort of removes the awkwardness or just sort of helps you get on with it. And for you, it's the dog and it's the dog park, and that there's a shared connection there. Yeah. And we heard that no one knows anyone's human names, but they know the pets.
Yes.
So they're like, oh, number 2, that's, Eric the Greyhound.
Yeah.
But they can't quite remember the owner's names.
Yeah. And we had lots of examples of that, whether it was even actually through your children, that you've met other parents that they play sports or in their class, or this idea of, I almost think of it like, like a cord that connects you, that you kind of plug between 2 things. It just makes that connection a little bit easier. We heard that connection is hard for some people, so doing it through something or others actually makes it a lot easier to engage in.
Yeah, and we were calling them levelers. That was the language we were using, the connection levelers, because some people find connection really natural and organic, and other people find it really difficult. So you have to understand that if you're managing a team, you're going to have different connection archetypes within your team. So don't just assume that everyone finds it easy. Sometimes dogs can help people connect. And I think that what you've hit on is that there is an element of vulnerability in connection, especially in a moment where the context changes. So in a moment where I am in my team and I know everyone and we've got kind of quite good tenure and we're operating, and then there's a restructure. And I'm put from people and culture over to the change team, and I don't know anyone very well. and I'm all of a sudden the new person. My connection needs in that transition moment change. And so I think it's really important, and part of our research really discovered that there are key moments in an employee's experience where they're transitioning from one context to another, and it's a signal that their connection needs are changing. And all it requires really of a leader or for anyone in the team is to really ask sort of how can we support you connecting with the team or with the goals right now, and not assuming that they're going to come in and have the same experience of connection that everyone else has had.
Yeah.
So it's a really good example of how connection needs change as well. So let's get stuck into some of the things that we've found in the research. So for some of you that were a bit uncomfortable with kind of storytelling and sort of who we are, and you're still getting through that, we'll give you some facts now and get more technical with it.
Thanks, Gems. And there is lots of research happening in this space. If this is a topic you are passionate about, you're probably seeing more organisations producing this type of material. We know that there is such a pervasive need for more connection in organisations. And I think just to call out a few, 72% of employees say it's important to them to feel part of a community at work. That is a huge number of people. And when we talk about community, we don't necessarily just talk about the community within your team. In the research that we've done, we've asked the employees that we're working with to share what communities that they feel a part of. Someone will say, I'm part of the dog community on Slack, or I'm part of, parents with young kids on Slack, or I'm part of the bike club. These are all communities that they feel a part of. What was really interesting actually is that in one of our pieces of work, a particular employee who this organisation was globally based, and they didn't actually have office premises in this particular location. So he was working out of a co-working space, and he actually said, I feel really connected to my colleagues in my co-working space. So what's really interesting here, I think, as an employee is understanding what connection means for your people, but where does it matter that you need to play in that space? Because if he's saying, I feel connected because I'm connected to the community I'm with day to day, maybe that's enough for him. Maybe you don't need to do more than that. Which doesn't mean that you don't do other things for other people, but if, on a one-on-one basis as a leader, is when we think about we have limited time, resource, effort and energy, is how do we make sure that we're maximising that impact and not doing things, we kind of giggle. We had so much people say, no more trivia nights. Like, I'm done. I'm done with the Zoom trivias. That is not my deepest need, and we'll talk a bit more about this later on. So that's a really interesting conversation to have with someone, to be able to say, what do you need right now? Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah.
Some other interesting facts, I think, whilst obviously you've got all this beautiful data, one of the other things that we also saw in our research was that teams who self-reported that they feel more connected, talked about actually the impact of their performance at work.
Yeah.
So I think, we all talk about that we feel good, we feel more connected, but actually a lot of the research is saying that teams that are more connected, they're more productive. They collaborate better, they innovate better together. We heard examples of people saying, when my leader creates time for us just to chat, whether that was half an hour, a fortnight, we actually ideate better because we've got this relationship that we've built and we feel safe with each other. These ideas are flowing. Now, this particular team was like a product creation, innovation team.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty important, right, for the work that they do, that they feel like they can be innovative. So we actually, what we might do is we might circulate these reports to share that you can all have afterwards. Yeah. So what we have absolutely discovered is that there are lots of things that are driving and derailing connection, but we want to touch on the real core themes that can tend to show themselves in all of the work that we're doing. Proximity is a really interesting one. Proximity, and this is probably no surprise, is both driving and derailing connection. Now, what I mean by this is how close you are to an office. So we use a lens of, again, because we're working with global organisations, of 3 hours or less, you're close to an office, which I know for all of us seems ridiculous, we wouldn't travel that far, or 3 hours or more and then you're not close to an office. We absolutely saw that people who said that they are closer to an office felt like they were more connected. The reason being, though, was that the organisation's focus was on activities in the office. They were catering for that audience only. They weren't doing a lot to cater for the audience that weren't in close proximity to an office. So, of course, naturally, they're saying, well, yeah, because I can go to the office and I can engage in this and that, I feel more connected. On the flip side, when we spoke to employees who weren't close to an office, they all reported feeling like they were disconnected. we actually heard people saying that they've self-funded their travel to be able to get closer to their team so that they can feel connected. A grad was even one of them. I was like, oh my God, what an awful experience that, you're self-funding your travel. They were the only person that wasn't in the office and could really feel like it was impacting their ability to do their job. So this is why we say it's showing up as a driver and a derailer. Our hope is, as we start to have more of these conversations and we become more purposeful about what is the experience that we're designing and how do we co-design, that we just get a little bit more intentional about what's the experience for the person that's not in the office all the time. And then not this afterthought, right? It's this real design of who is my audience, where are they, and therefore how am I designing this experience? Whereas what we're seeing at the moment is the person that's not in the office is a bit of an afterthought. Now, that is a broad generalisation. I have no doubt there are some organisations doing some great things in this space, but there's a real intentionality that needs to be placed in the proximity piece.
But we found that, didn't we, around
we
there's something about seeing someone in 3D and having that environment that can help, but it's not always easy for people. So the physical space can play a really important role, but it doesn't do the work by itself.
Yes.
I think that's the key takeaway, is that there will be people who will naturally, and we found this with some of the archetypes around connection, they'll burst into this space and they'll just be like, I've never met you before, and sometimes they are more extroverted, but not always. And there'll be people who are like, holy crap, this is so hard for me. Like, I'm in such an uncomfortable zone. And that's where those levelers can help. So if you have got someone who's naturally more connected, have them meet the people who are a little bit more sort of wary, help sort of integrate that and just be a bit more intentional about it, because as you've experienced, that physical connection can really make a difference to how much of a community you feel at work.
These are one of the spaces that we talk about. Be really purposeful about where you create physical connection. So onboarding is one of these transition moments that Gemma talked about earlier, right? Is someone's need for connection really deepens in that moment. So what are you doing then to create that the opportunity for them to come together? Because we know that it will help amplify the work piece, right? We heard that time and time again.
Yeah, and I think, I think REA groups still have, I don't know if anyone's from REA group here, but if they still have it online around their hybrid ways of working, I think you can still get that document online on their website. But what I think is great about their example is that they've paid attention to the moments where we need to be physically together, and it's not just 4 days a week or 3 days a week. These are the moments where it makes sense for us to have physical connection. Kicking off a new project, joining a new team, having leadership development with a group. Whereas one-on-one leadership coaching can be done virtually, and they're really identifying where they believe the physical environment makes a difference to those moments. And that's the difference between the blanket sort of 3 or 4 days, which people sometimes go, how did you get there? How did you figure out 3 days was the sweet spot? And who does it work for and who doesn't it work for? I want to talk about this sort of inclusive and equitable experiences here just slightly, in the fact that there's been a bit of a trend where we've been designing with the assumption that everyone has the same connection needs, and I've talked about this before, which is not everyone is going to have the same experience of connection in the workplace, because they have different wants and needs. So, for example, when we all came back after that final horrible Melbourne lockdown, and it was like, some of us were desperate to get back into the office. Some of us still had family members that were immunized. I can never say that word. Thank you. And so it felt really risky to go into the office because you felt like you were going to bring something home and put your family members at risk. And so it's really important to understand that also it might not be easy for everyone to get back into an office. Daycare situations might change. You might now be looking after a family member or a parent might have moved in with you that you're now caring for. And so whilst it's not the workplace's role to deal with all of those personal situations, it is important to understand that we all have lives outside of work and we're not all on a level playing field. And so when you're creating these experiences, it's really important to understand what's the deepest need of the people in your team at that time. And I think we can get this wrong. We can say, trivia and beers, right? Sort of the go-to thing. Let's just bring everyone in for beers and trivia, and we'll have it on a Friday night, and that'll help with the connection of the team. Now, that's great in theory, and it's coming from a great place, which is you've recognised as a leader that your team really requires some connection. But what you're not considering is the fact that not everyone in your team might be drinking alcohol. I'm 10 months, 14 days alcohol free right now. And so thanks. I love that little clap. Yeah. I'm going to do a year. It's my little personal experiment. But, for cultural, religious reasons, not everyone will drink. So you go into a brewery and some people are like, oh, I'm not sure. Is there going to be non-alcoholic options? Am I going to be awkward asking for that? Also, do they need trivia if they've just worked on a project where they're really burnt out? Or do they actually just need half a day off for a digital detox? Or do they need something like we had some great examples where people got together for walks along, like a local connection for a walk. And a coffee after, and the company just said, we'll fund the coffee and breakfast after, and it was a different way of doing it. Another example that we heard as well is that if you hear that there's an experience that's maybe different by gender. So I had one person who said that there was feedback that it felt a bit like women weren't getting career opportunities, they weren't seeing women in leadership roles, and so that feedback was given around the experience. And as a result, the organisation said, we'll bring in a keynote speaker to talk about time management for women, because that's obviously why women aren't succeeding. So it's already a bit of a no-go. And we'll also just put on a lot of cupcakes. To which point the woman said, I resigned the next day. So you've got to be careful when you're creating well-intended connection moments that you're not putting those sort of assumptions in place, and you're actually getting to understand what is actually getting in the way of career development for women, and just trying to dig a little bit deeper before you roll out the general interventions for connection. And it's sad because she was one of the only few middle management women in the organisation. So just a little bit of an example, just to pay attention that we're not on a level playing field, and just to consider what is the deepest need of connection for your team in that moment, and who might benefit from it and who might miss out. And it's small things. So, bring people together for an in-person event. Maybe don't have it at the brewery. Maybe have it at somewhere that has, or have it at a brewery that has non-alcoholic options. So just a few little tweaks you can do.
One of the biggest things that are driving connection is this idea of play, storytelling and conversations. And maybe this is no surprise. Maybe we've given you the opportunity of seeing this in practice this morning, right? We have heard this time and time again in our research. Now, when I talk about play, sure, if your team want to go and play baseball or kick the footy together, whatever it looks like, that is fabulous for connection, absolutely. But we mean just be playful in terms of how you might work together. How are you brainstorming a particular problem, and be playful in how you might solve that challenge. Think about the way that we used to do things. How do we, incorporate more play so that we get this opportunity to really show different parts of ourselves. Storytelling. You all have been in that moment, and maybe you were in it this morning with Gemma and I, where we told our story, and it's like you're there with us, right? For those of you, when I talked about having my sister's morning sickness, not being pregnant, I'm sure you all kind of had this visceral reaction, right? That kind of went, ugh. That is the power of storytelling, is you give someone this emotional opportunity to engage with you and connect with you in that moment. You've been there where that friend says, oh my God, this has happened. You're like, I am with you, sister. I felt every element of that, right? It is so impactful. Now, we're not suggesting that you all go and unleash, any trauma for yourselves by telling these deep, dark, stories, right? We're definitely not advocating for that. You can do that, make sure you've got some really great support if you are doing that. But be creative about something you want your team to care about. How do you tell them it in story? How do you bring emotion into that conversation so that you allow them the opportunity to connect with why something might be important that you do? Think about, we're doing this upgrade on our platform because we want to make our customers' life easier, versus we had the opportunity to meet with our customers recently and recognise that they've been trying to engage with their clients in this really unique way, and actually our platform is getting in the way. We want them to have great impact. We want to make their customers happy, and this is what we're going to do about it. You can see, I could have probably done a better job there, but you can see just in that example, there is such more of an opportunity for someone to lean into the story of the latter example and go, yeah, I get why this is important, let's go and do it. So don't underestimate the value in that. And then we talk about conversation, and we don't necessarily just talk about one-to-one, but one-to-many. But again, I gave that example earlier around a leader just creating space for conversation. Reflect yourself. How often do you have the time for that with your team? People actually gave us so many examples which just broke our heart of. They said, we've stopped saying hello to each other. We jump on that Zoom and we get straight into the agenda. Like, are you building time to say, hi, how are you? Like, we're human. We're meant to do that. We're meant to care about each other. So, think about some of the practices and the ways in which you're working, how you might feed in some of these concepts, because we have seen them amplify connection. One point to mention, there's this really cool research that's been done at one of the universities in the States around connection formation. And the research has shown that it takes 30 to 60 seconds for connection formation to begin. The coolest thing, it is all non-verbal. It's looking at someone in the eyes, it's that body posture leaning forward, it's the nodding of the head, it's the, where you might move your hands. 30 to 60 seconds and that connection formation has started. So if people are saying to you, I don't have time for connection, like we've got a whole other, we need to talk to you about burnout or something. I'm sure like there's more things at play, right? So these are some of the things the research are telling us. We can do this. And again, you will have all felt that, right? Where you've met someone, you just know that you've made that connection.
Yeah.
Be really purposeful.
So, yeah, there's a real opportunity. And simple things, like Alana said, if you're getting your team together for a little brainstorm, 5 minutes and say, what would they do? And you pick 4 companies. You say Macca's, Lego, Domino. I'm trying to think of food. Maybe I'm hungry. And Patagonia, right? What would they do? Those 4 companies, if they were faced with this challenge around this, what would they do? And you just kick them off with something that's a bit playful, bit outside their comfort zone, and then you can bring back to, okay, well, that's what they might do, but what can we pick from that might be viable in our context? And you can kind of just have these little playful techniques that really help.
Yeah. Your example is a great segue to one of the other things that we find that is really driving connection is this commonality and shared experiences. So in those moments where you're hearing people's story and you're recognising, I see something of me in them, I see we have this common interest, you're starting that connection. One of our clients do these intro blogs when someone starts at the business, which is all about kind of who they are and what's brought them to this organisation thus far. And people have said, because I read that person's intro blog, when I then had a meeting with them, I was like, I already know you, man. And they kicked off to work. They kind of had this conversation about, oh, I love this food, or yeah, I've been to that place on holiday. And the work just kind of flourished as a result of that. So don't underestimate this ability to be able to share things that you each have in common. Think about the people that you connect really regularly and why you connect really regularly, right? I reckon there's probably some commonality in that. And then shared experiences. So we heard a lot about what we have called heat moments, which I'm very conscious of saying that in like thinking about dogs. It's definitely not that.
Yeah. I was thinking menopause, but you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, God, where are we this morning?
Yeah.
But what we mean by a heat moment is a time where the team are under an immense amount of pressure. Now, that could be that, something has blown up and they've got this real pointy focus of, platform's gone down, we need to solve it, we've got 2 weeks. We heard so many examples of people saying when they were in these moments, they got to know more about their people. Someone said, I got to know more about my team in that 2 week than I had in the whole 2 years prior working together in the same team. I mean, that's mental, right? Now, again, we're not advocating that you go in and create heat moments in organisations just for fun.
Just throw a crisis out there.
Yeah, exactly. But actually, there is probably something you could do around how do you create this real single pointy focus. When we kind of unpacked what was it about that crisis moment or that heat moment that really enabled you to come together, people said, we were so clear on what we had to do. Our goal was like super, super crystal clear. We were clear on our roles that we each had to play to make that goal possible, and we had lots of opportunity to listen and give each other feedback.
And minimal distractions.
And minimal distractions.
So the path was cleared.
Correct.
And leaders were like, do not throw them extra things for this period. They're working on that. That can wait. So it was a real prioritization and limiting of distraction.
Yeah. So some of these kind of levelers in terms of really helping you understand what is the deepest need for connection in the moment, whether that's individually or for your team. And we almost look at this as a bit of a kind of Maslow's hierarchy, right? It's this idea of going from being to doing to growing. And so at the bottom here, this is really the basic piece around humans need to have this bond. We're not created to be, independent, isolated beings. We're meant to be in community, and that's where we flourish. So when you are thinking about what you're trying to do with your team or in your organisation, it's really understanding, have I done enough work in this space? Do people truly really feel like they've connected at that real basic level. Once you're able to then satisfy that is then moving up to that doing, which is being able for them to be able to apply their knowledge and wisdom. So again, we heard lots of great examples of people saying, you know, we've got this space now in our team where we each bring in our thoughts that we've, you know, things that we're learning of other organisations are doing and bringing them into the team, and we're growing and we're innovating because of that. I've got the ability to apply all this stuff that's in my brain and that I'm good at. Moving up from that, we talk about the growing. This is this idea of, we kind of, you know, it escalates from the apply stage of how they connect to others to really form those new ideas and be innovative and create together. And so in all of the research we've done is when we're seeing organisations really spend and pay attention to this bottom rung of being, and are you creating environments and spaces for people to truly connect, the other happens naturally. You know, people have said, because I've got these relationships, we can innovate, because we work better together, we can collaborate, all that good stuff. We heard so much about the importance of co-design. So, you know, people had said, you know, if the ownership is sitting with one person, whether that's your leader, and typically is a leader to organise whatever the thing is, people are kind of saying, oh, again, you know, maybe I would have done it differently. So we're encouraging leaders to actually co-design with your team. So this is we've got coming up. Give people choice. Again, remember, not everyone is good at this stuff and they don't want to do it. We heard leaders say, I'm not that person in my social life. I shouldn't be organising stuff at work. Like, that, I'm not that go-to person. So recognise that that might not be a strength. You know, some leaders had said, I feel like I've become an event planner. When did that happen? I'm an engineer. How did I get to this point, right? So it is recognising, as we've alluded to, that it is different for everyone and everyone has a strength. You do need to be really mindful, though, of holding the hand of people that find it tough, though, because otherwise they might not engage in any of it. So we've identified 4 emerging archetypes through our work, and we kind of look at the polar opposite ends, the one end that's like your person who's all over it, like, man, they're like 99.9% of the time initiating everything. And then at the other end, you've got someone who's like, you know what, I'm actually only going to engage with this because I'm going to get something out of it. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. You know, I think it's a waste of time. So make sure that you're pairing these people up, right? So they're kind of saying, come on, come along, we've got this thing. Otherwise, we run the risk of these people, you know, not necessarily engaging all the time. And then the flip side, we talk about with our lovely person who's doing everything, that they can have a bit of compassion fatigue because they are doing everything. So be really mindful about that person in your team that's always playing that role, or maybe some of you in the room play that role, is we know that's heavy, hard work. And so again, how do you share that more overtly as well?
Alana and Gemma will be around for a little while, so feel free to get together afterwards and ask questions. There's plenty of food left if you'd like some more breakfast and juices in the boardroom. We will send out information from today's session. Thank you all so much for getting involved this morning. Really great to see so many faces in the office and have such a great discussion. And Alana and Gemma, amazing as always. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for